Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 14th of June, 2016. Just had to check that date. Just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Patrick Henningsen. Great to have you still with us, Patrick. It's really good.
Great to be with you again, Brian.
Okay, and we'll also be joined by live Skype link by Alex Thompson, Eastern Approaches, who'll be speaking to us from Holland. Before we get going with today's news, we'll just say, first of all, thank you, a very big thank you to all the people who've taken out a subscription with the UK column. We have been encouraging people to sign up with that small monthly amount, but a regular income is very important to us. So we really do appreciate those of you who've decided to do that. And we're also asking very nicely if people who've been with us for quite a long time on the free subscription account, would you consider moving over and making a small monthly donation? We can only do what we do with your help and, of course, with that financial support. Well, the weather is a bit iffy, I think the correct English term is for that is, which basically we've got a bit of sunshine. The next minute it's cloud, drizzle, a bit of rain. Most people seem to be reporting that across the country. Meanwhile, in Arizona, it's 100 plus.
I haven't looked, but you're probably right there, Brian.
Okay. Well, we're going to get straight into the subject of the United States and the Orlando shooting. And really, Pat, I think I'll pass this one over to you. We're going to bring in Alex as well, because, of course, he's been paying attention. So, Alex, have we got you?
Yes, Brian, I'm here, and it's been chucking it down here in Holland till a few minutes ago, but it's temporarily dry.
Okay.
If you hear tapping on the windowsill today, that's because I've just fed the neighbourhood pigeons, and they'll want some more soon.
Okay, all right. Well, we hope the water level doesn't rise, get the windmills turning. But Alex, what's your view on the events in the States, the shooting? You've got the Figaro commenting here.
Yes, well, they're commenting on their own version because these things are coming so thick and fast now, and people might not be aware that the French have had the assassination of a policeman and his girlfriend. It's the first time that France has ever had an off-duty policeman attacked in this IRA style. And it's a 25-year-old perpetrator called Larossi Abala. And as you just had on screen there, Le Figaro is reporting that he was already on the radar of anti-terrorism. Now, for this, I suggested the caption, "Another day, another known wolf," because as Pat said in yesterday's broadcast, a lone wolf who is well known to the authorities is actually a known wolf. But Mike has gone one step further, and he's called him a lone wolf, as in to lend. Because he's been lent, I think, for the purpose of this. So Mr. Abala was he was just 3 years or so in prison because he was a recruiter for a French-Pakistani terrorist network. No sooner has he come out, he's from France, by the way, from Mont-la-Jolie. No sooner has he got out of prison than he heads over to a policeman's house west of Paris, holds him, his girlfriend and their baby hostage, puts on Facebook Live and broadcasts himself murdering the policeman and his girlfriend, and then saying to camera, "I don't know what I'm going to do with this baby."
Nice.
So that's France today.
Right, and can you pick up from the media that you're seeing and reading what the reaction is in France?
The French are obviously extremely shocked because they never had terrorism. Even the Germans did in the past. They had the Rotes Armee-Fraktion in the 1970s, you know, the Bader-Meinhof gang. So they are used to this in a way that we are as well. The most recent French memories of such things go back to the OAS, the Algerian struggle of 50 years ago. So they are particularly shocked by this, and I think they're slow, judging by social media, to pick up on the fact that this guy was well known to authorities, and at the very least ought to have been under better surveillance, and at the most perhaps was permitted or nudged in the direction of the murder. Germans are picking up on it, and on Orlando. I was just saying to Pat before we started broadcasting, a lot of Germans, including some political figures I follow, are saying, how is it that in the dark you can get a heavy gun into a nightclub with, depending on how many rounds were in the stock, between 6 and 10 replacement clips, and a great long gun sight and nozzle, get that into a sweltering summer club in Florida and discharge 200 rounds, 100 of which hit their targets in the dark, and 50 of those hits are then deaths. A lot of Germans are very sceptical about that, I can see, for starters.
Well, the Le Figaro article there, this is a terrorist recruiter. This is the exact MO of someone we're going to show later in the show, His name is Marcus Robertson. He was an FBI informant and a terrorist recruiter and the imam at the Orlando Mosque, where the shooter, Omar Mateen, attended services. So again, this is the MO. A recruiter is a really important position for the security services in the world of informants and double agents, because they're the choke point in the contact with the foot soldiers, if you will.
Yep.
The idealistic young radical foot soldiers and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised if this person here is absolutely an asset of the intelligence agencies. Pretty obvious. He's done his time, got his street cred, he's out, and now he's
doing stuff.
Doing stuff.
And
yeah.
I'd just comment on the fact that I've been hearing reports over the last week, maybe a little bit longer, about possible plans to introduce Muslim-only prisons in UK. And if you think that one through, so you say, well, we've got a problem with some members of the Muslim community. What we're going to do is we're going to put those in special segregated prisons, and I can see what that's going to do is create an absolute hotbed of
well, not just extremism, Brian, but
extremism, that's the word.
But a very
recruiting ground,
very fertile recruiting ground, not just for radical terror cells, but for the security services. That is already happening in British prisons. They're already becoming segregated, and a lot of young white young men in prisons are converting to Islam to survive, but also strength in numbers. That's the dominant gang or the dominant enclave in the British prison system.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because basically you're taking a group of people, you're putting them into a highly pressurized environment. What's that going to do? It's going to push those people closer together. They're going to bond. They're going to pick up on each other's grievances, and you're going to breed them.
And the best criminal minds all in one place. Usually your skill levels increase geometrically.
How did you do it? What techniques did you use?
This is what always happens.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm going to add to that is I always found it remarkable some years ago when we found that the political charity Common Purpose was boasting that it was going into Britain's prisons in order to teach criminals leadership.
Interesting.
Maybe it was political leadership.
Yeah. Gangs and counter gangs. Well, the next slide that Alex has provided is particularly interesting. Alex, I was wondering if you could set this up. Because the reason this is interesting, Alex, is because when this shooting happened, the first event I thought of was the siege at the Russian school some years ago. So if you could walk us through this, the similarities are interesting and the contrast is interesting in the scenarios.
In the 1990s, there were two Chechen wars, and after from the Russian side, the successful prosecution of the second one, there was an insurgency campaign, and the nadir of that were two attacks in Moscow, one at the North Ossetia in 2002, and the other was this attack on the first day of the school year at Beslan in North Ossetia, near Chechnya, in September 2004, and 350-odd people, almost all of them school children, perished in that attack. And because this stuff is so gory and harrowing, I mean, I was in GCHQ for years, and I've never seen anything like it for harrowingness. So I decided not to show any photos. Instead, I've shown this sketch of what happened inside. At the moment when the North Ossetian and also Russian federal forces decided to pounce, this was the setup, right? This is when there really was a prima facie reason to go all guns blazing, because these children were inside a ring of mines and bombs and having grenades and rifles pointed at them. And at that point, the Russians punched through the wall. Sadly, some children perished in the explosions at the time, but they were already being butchered by these terrorists, all but one of whom, by the way, was shot to death on the scene, and one of them is on a special prison island in the north of Russia now. Now, after this, the Russians were panned in American and European press for having played so lightly with the children's lives as to punch a hole in the wall. You know, so that even though there was a real reason to go in, because every second counted, the hole was punched in the wall, and I think quite a lot of children were probably saved that way. Compare and contrast with the Orlando situation, where the Bearcat went punching through the wall during a time when, by all accounts, there was no shooting.
Yeah. So not only that, but behind the Bearcat, these explosives to punch the hole, The Bearcat came through the weakened structure, and then the SWAT team came in firing at the same time. Now we've got a video clip we're going to play. Listen to this. This is from the shooting. This is when at the height of the barrage of gunfire. I think this was at the time the wall was breached, but this is from courtesy of Live Leak. Go ahead and play this. So, Brian, as you can see, the majority...
You've got seconds of automatic fire, so you're discharging hundreds of rounds.
The majority
thousands of rounds.
And the majority of those are coming from police, from the SWAT, because there would have been, I don't know how many dozens of SWAT guys who are trigger happy, ready to go, hopped up and ready to shoot.
In a dark, confused environment.
Right. So we're meant to believe that one single gunman, like Alex had said, had hit all these targets with all those shots and reloaded 10 times or 6 times or whatever. But there we have the video from Live Leak that shows the barrage of gunfire couldn't have been from one. So the question is, did friendly fire or not so friendly fire cause any of the nightclub goers to perish when that siege came to an abrupt end?
Yeah.
And why did they wait 3 to 3.5 hours to do anything about it? That's extraordinary.
And as you said yesterday, how is it that the gunman got back into the nightclub after he'd stepped outside?
Stepped outside, exchanged fire with a police officer, and then I guess they just left them for 3 hours after that.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary. So, but we're going to get through a few slides. But Alex, do you have any comments on that situation?
I will just throw one thing in at this stage, and this is something I've never talked about because on my father's side of the family, it's, I actually know a couple of people who were involved as school teachers, but Dunblane is what I would say. The first school shooting outside the United States in pretty much any country. And you know that Thomas Hamilton almost physically couldn't have shot all those children in the angles that he did, and it probably required 2 or 3 shooters at different angles higher up the wall. There are details about this apparently that were given to the Cullen inquiry, but Lord Cullen sealed that report for 100 years.
Oh, I wonder why that was sealed for 100 years.
Standard procedure in UK in order to cover up criminal action by the state, Patrick.
Yeah, so I would wager, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, to put money down that friendly fire or the explosives coming through the wall, as Alex had articulated from the Beslan School incident, would be taking some of the lives of some of those club goers. So that would be my guess. So, but moving on, so here we have the shooter. This is from the Orlando Sentinel. Now this is interesting. This story was framed as he was anti-gay, and they set this story up from early Sunday morning as being an attack on the gay community, on the LGBT community. And here we have a report from the Orlando Sentinel. The shooter was a regular attendee of this gay club, and one of the punters had even said he'd been on a gay chat app with him for up to 1 year before the shooting. So if this is the case, if this is indeed true, this report, that blows out of the water the assumption that this was a hate crime or, you know, a sort of Muslim hate crime. And people say, well, he was married with kids. That's neither here nor there when it comes to the world of alternative lifestyles or whatever. So it doesn't matter if he was married with kids. He was a regular frequent visitor of this same nightclub.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, that changes the narrative considerably.
But as we're going to see, it gets pretty involved with a number of players and assets coming into the picture.
And speaking of which, so this is interesting. This is the father of the shooter. His name is Sadiq Mateen. He's a very interesting chap, Brian. He was running for president of Afghanistan. He's a major contract holder, either with the Department of Defense or possibly with the CIA in Afghanistan. He's got an LLC registered to his name. Here he is outside the U.S. State Department in April, and he has met with some very high-ranking U.S. government federal officials, including Ed Royce, chairman of I believe, the Foreign Relations Committee, an ardent war hawk as well. And here it is. This is the shooter's father.
Looking very professional, relaxed, comfortable in that environment. And I also think it's significant there. He's got his coat under his arm. So he's been somewhere with that coat, and he's come into an environment and he's taken that coat off and he's hanging on to it. So he's in an environment where he hasn't just sort of rushed in and just get a picture in front of the door. He's looking to me casual, relaxed. He's there for a purpose.
He is, if we look at his profile, he also has an Afghan satellite TV talk show. I think it's run out of Southern California. And a lot of people joke on social media that this is ISI TV. In other words, it's a mouthpiece for the Pakistani ISI. So here we have the father of the shooter, possible accusations, connections with the ISI, the CIA. This brings us back to the Mujahideen and the whole sort of war on terror industrial complex.
Right, but it all started out as a shooting within the gay community.
That's
so
right.
So it's getting more interesting.
It started out as a hate crime, and it just gets more interesting. So this is the when confronted with the information about the father. Here is Mark Toner, spokesman for the State Department, and
shall I read that one out? It says, "Well, thanks," and sorry, here we go. "Well, thanks, and I actually appreciate you raising that so I can address that picture." So that is obviously, as you noted, it's a picture or a photo he took, and this is talking about the father, he took purporting to show him meeting with State Department officials. That's actually in front of our office on Capitol Hill. So this man is intimating that the picture we've just shown with the man looking very casual, he's only outside the door.
Yeah, he's only outside the door within the building.
Yeah, how do you get into the building, that sort of building? You just walk in off the street, Pat?
I don't think so. I think you might require an appointment of some sort, but...
in Foggy Bottom in the State Department, and I can tell you it's no lark to get through the security there. But I think the claim here is that Mr. Siddiq actually went one step higher than that and went into the Capitol itself and went to the, as it were, the State Department's liaison or representation in the Capitol building. Now, Pat, you'll probably be able to better me on there. I've only had the public tours at the Capitol, but I think that you get even more security and ID checks there than you do at Foggy Bottom.
Maybe so, but it just goes to show that this is a very well-connected individual. And when pressed on this matter, Mark Toner continues.
This is the rest of it. He says, "But we have no records of any meeting with this gentleman and any State Department policy officials whatsoever. We're obviously going back through our records, but my understanding of this photo is he simply stood in front of the door and took his picture." It's all, we're really not very sure about anything. Sure. I find the language beautiful because our records really don't show anything, and apparently he just stood in front of the door.
Sure.
We don't know how he got in front of the door.
And this is Mark Toner. This is the same spokesman that will say repeatedly in the last 2 months that we're not giving arms or support to Al-Qaeda in Syria. We're giving it to the moderate rebels.
The good terrorists.
The good terrorists. Yeah. So the denial, obfuscation, deception, this is all part and parcel of a daily work at the U.S. State Department when it comes to all things terror. So here's the point. That's the father of the gunman of the worst mass shooting, we're told anyway, in U.S. history.
Yeah.
And that's the dad.
Yeah, it's just an ordinary dad.
Sure, and interesting. So the son worked for G4S, the shooter worked for G4S, possibly nightclub security. We're not sure. We're working on a confirmation. Could be G4S, we're not sure. But again, son, also well connected. The son, the shooter, is a contractor for the Department of Homeland Security. That's confirmed as well.
Yeah.
In the last 24 hours. So
there's a lot of questions to be asked.
There's a lot of interesting connections and a lot of questions. So speaking of G4S, after the Orlando shooting, and I'm sure a lot of people are upset about this, especially UK column readers, G4S shares fall 8% after gunman confirms to be the employee of the company of Group 4 Security.
Well, we're not seeing any massive denials by G4S on this, and if they're prepared to take an 8% fall on share price and not defend their position in the press, it's got to be true, hasn't it?
Yeah. And also, G4S also, I believe, probably has contracts in Afghanistan. among other foreign locations.
Well, I think we'd have to say we don't know where all of the contracts are for all G4S, but they're popping up everywhere.
They guard embassies in places like, typically in countries like Afghanistan. But
Yeah.
so that's interesting. Alex, do you have any comment on this before we move on?
Only that G4S are sitting pretty because they are the lead partner in GSL, Group 4 Group 4 Services Limited, which is the consortium that rakes in millions a month from the government for owning and providing the GCHQ building and all the services therein to the government. So they're not exactly about to lose much. Incidentally, when I played in the brass band just up the road from Cheltenham in Winchcombe, a very pretty Cotswold village, the locals, this would be about 2002-03, pointed out to me a walled-off property in the centre of the village and said that belongs to, I forget the surname, I think his first name was Michael. He's from Denmark and he owns Group 4. This was in the days before Group 4 became a name that was so much mud that they abbreviated it to just the letter G. Yeah? So Group 4 in the early days of the prison breakouts of the 90s, and that's the owner, that Dane, sat basically on a hill overlooking the Cheltenham Donut while it was being built, gloating about the fact that it was all his building and being rented out to the government at an extortionate profit. So I don't think 8% off their shares is much skin off their nose, really.
No, well, thank you for that interesting story. Doesn't this sort of sum up UK quite nicely, that we're no longer sure who is actually running our public services? We don't know whether public organisations designed to protect us are protecting us or making profit for the corporations. It's all become very blurred and it's a pretty dangerous pond, isn't it? So if we come back in here, I think, Patrick, with the Orlando gunman tied to radical imam.
So this is priceless information now. Now the picture is becoming clear, Brian. So the Orlando gunman, Omar Mateen, attended a radical mosque with services run by a radical imam who just happens to be none other than Marcus Robertson, a former FBI informant of 15 years, and the bodyguard, the personal bodyguard of the blind sheikh, the right-hand man of one of the right hands of Osama bin Laden, and also a CIA asset, the blind sheikh, whose real name is Omar Abdel Rahman, I believe. So, and he was implicated in the 1993 World Trade Center building. We'll show how this links together in a couple of minutes. Yeah. But again, FBI informant, handlers, all of a sudden this shooter doesn't look like he's just any old angry Muslim who's inspired by ISIS on Twitter and grabs a gun and guns down 100 people.
Yep. Too many questions, too many links. And perhaps another topic to introduce here is, of course, we're now starting to say, if we're talking about Muslims and we're talking about radical Islam, who are we actually talking about? Are we talking about everybody who's part of Islam and Muslim faith? Are we talking about that? Or are we talking about a discrete body of people who clearly are being worked by corporate interest, black ops?
Exactly. So, Donald Trump has been going ad nauseum in the media, as has the whole of the GOP pro-war establishment. We need to do something about radical Islam in America. Why won't the president say radical Islam, as Rudolph Giuliani often says? Now, the problem isn't radical Islam, Brian. It seems to me the real problem is former CIA assets repositioned and rehoused on U.S. shores.
Yeah,
that seems to be the number one terror threat, as far as I can see, looking at the data and looking at this information.
Right, and if I add a bit to that, some very interesting information coming through the Muslim community in this country is that they say very interesting to watch where the mosques come from. So as we see new mosques appearing in UK, of course, huge amounts of money needed to build those mosques. Where's the money coming from? It's coming from Saudi, it's coming from Qatar. And then the next thing is the local Muslim communities are saying with the new mosque comes a new imam who is teaching a form of Islam that they haven't seen before. It's aggressive. It's very different, to the extent that one gentleman said to me that his father was considering no longer going because he said, this is not the Islam I remember being taught when I was a youth. Now, this is equivalent to people in the Christian church saying we've noticed a huge change in the teachings in the churches as we've seen the sort of more softer, radicalized agenda coming in where anything goes, which we could argue is not Christianity. But the key point was the new mosque coming with vast amounts of money from Saudi and Qatar. But if you've got the new mosque, you have to have our imam. Alex, sorry, I think I heard Alex comment in the background there.
Just to say, I'm in hearty agreement with that, Brian. The book you need to read on that, and some people will be a bit surprised that I'm plugging this name, but the book is full of good information, is Tommy Robinson's book, Enemy of the State. Now, I think all three of us are aware of that because earlier in the program we were talking about how Islamization of a particular kind, Islamistization, is happening in our prisons, and a lot of white prisoners are converting without having read a verse of the Quran for their own safety, because it's just joining a big gang, as you said. And very good tie-in there, Brian, with the churches, because in the case of preachers taking a church the wrong way, they've done so by going to a seminary which is being funded by, well, questionable sources. Because church attendance is down, and certain seminaries seem to have just enough money to teach the right new world order, new age gospel. That's very much akin to what's happening in the mosques, where the Deobandi and Wahhabi and Salafi strains are taking over from our own native South Asian Islamic traditions, which are much more rounded. And the same here in the Netherlands with the Turks, who are having this foisted upon them, and the Moroccans too. So ultimately, you need to look for a source of money in globalist circles. We haven't got time to go into it, but that we know who they are, who will fund New World Order seminaries and Salafist and Wahhabi mosques. And ultimately, these people are based in New York, Zurich, the City of London.
And this isn't just a problem that's exclusive to Britain or Europe, Brian. This is exactly the complaint that I've heard from residents in Syria, saying these new mosques, these new groups of imams came in 2009, 2010, and all of a sudden we started seeing things change, and then we got the violence started happening, and the destabilization ensued after that. So they've really suffered under this sort of imported Wahhabist regime, or the Deobandi or the Wahhabi, as Alex was pointing out.
Indicating. Well, we've touched on a really important subject, and of course we see the whole problems around race, migration, immigration, and Islam have been pushed and pushed. We can have further debate on that. Let's at the moment just finish off the Orlando. This is a little diagram we put together before the news. So if I lead through it, you correct me, Patrick, if I get this wrong. But we've got our shooter here. Nice little selfie. It's always good to have a selfie of the shooter, isn't it?
There's multiple selfies somehow circulating on the internet with this character. Yes.
Okay.
Always good.
So this is Mateen, and this is his father that we mentioned standing outside of the State Department office. So Sadiq Mateen, and as Patrick mentioned there, he was running for president of Afghanistan. He's allied with Taliban contacts, allegedly, and also a US Department defense contractor. So he's an interesting guy, and perhaps that's why he looks so relaxed with his raincoat over his arm. And then you'd mentioned this chap, Marcus Robertson, an imam from Orlando Mosque, but also an FBI informant for 15 years. And basically, this is obviously a man who's what we would call an asset, particularly when he's linked to the blind sheikh, who you've mentioned, Omar Abdul Rahman, connections through to Pakistani ISI.
So Marcus Robinson was the personal bodyguard of the blind sheikh.
Personal bodyguard,
Personal bodyguard. So, and the blind sheikh is he is the hub on a wheel of so many connections over the last 30 years internationally.
Right. And so the blind sheikh himself, CIA asset from the 1980s, Mujahideen commander.
Connections with the Pakistani ISI, fantastic resume. Is he really blind? That's debatable as well, but you can see he's kind of a theatrical character.
And then he's also connected through to the World Trade Center bombing.
So they tried to bring charges initially on him for the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, and the CIA blocked the investigation. Eventually, charges were brought, and it was then found out that the whole 1993 World Trade Center bombing was part of an FBI sting. an FBI-cultivated terror cell. In fact, the FBI provided some of the materials for the bombing itself and allowed it to happen. Yet, BBC, CNN, ABC, all these great journalists will still refer to it as an Al-Qaeda attack or a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Still, even though it's obvious what happened in 1993 has nothing to do with homegrown terror.
No. Well, you've mentioned the BBC. We could run a whole program on that. Perhaps we should. Let's just finish off that little network because we can link the blind sheikh through to this man, Abu Hamza, and that, of course, is going to bring us through to Finsbury Park Mosque. And the moment we're there, we're back into British intelligence. We put MI6 in here, but of course you're talking MI5, MI6. And if that is not enough, we better just remind people that we've also now got this link through to G4S. So quite clearly, the worst shooting in America is a disgruntled member of the gay community who decided that was going to go into a nightclub and kill people. This just can't be true, can it?
Yeah, who knows what the actual story is, but what we can say we've clearly demonstrated here, Brian, is that there's some very shady connections, and there's more than a possibility, a probability of handlers involved with this shooter was under the management of somebody, whether it was someone like a Marcus Robinson or someone that's not even on this diagram who we'll never see.
Yeah.
So
Alex, I hope you were able to follow that diagram through on screen. Just over to you for any comments you'd like to make.
Well, it's just the usual spaghetti, isn't it? It's a bit worrying that G4S is so closely tied in. And as usual, the radical Islamic element is not being provided by someone from the Middle East. In this case, it's an African-American convert, allegedly to Islam. They have big problems in North America with the African-Americans who really converted to Islam in the 50s and 60s, finding a lot of these guys coming up who, again, haven't read the Quran, have got a basically racist view of Islam. They think that there are versions of Christianity that have been tweaked the same way. They think that black men have souls and white men don't. It's a major problem. Perhaps Pat could talk a bit about the dynamics of Islam in North America, because we don't hear much about that.
It is kind of a difficult subject. You've got Louis Farrakhan, you've got different aspects of Islam in America, but you do have this recent import of radical ideology via Saudi-funded mosques through a series of very complex network of charities
and NGOs
as well. So, but Marcus Robertson was a former Marine soldier. He was groomed for this job. He has worked for the CIA. He was undercover as a bodyguard for the blind sheik. He was an asset, and later he became an FBI informant.
Yeah.
These are people who are in the system for their whole careers. And who knows
special ops.
Who knows what their personal story is, if they're struggling with substance abuse or they've been nabbed in some sort of a double-blind blackmail scam to get them to become a career informant. Who knows what it is? But the point is, there's handlers, there's assets, there's informants. And when you have these things, you can't tell me that you can sell me an official story that's an open shut case in 24 hours, like they've done in Orlando.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, take us on through, because no sooner has than the deaths occurred than people were asking to raise money for the victims.
So this was one of the biggest funds to support the victims of the Pulse shooting. This came up online within hours of the shooting. They've raised just about $3 million. Probably by the time the end of this program's over, Brian, they'll have hit the 3 million mark. 90,000 donors or shares, many thousands of donors. And this is basically started not by anybody to do with the shooting, by a charity.
Victim support charity.
It's Equity Florida or Equitable Solutions or something like this. I don't have the terminology in front of me, but they said they're going to give the money to the National Victim Support Network.
Yeah. So
you're supposed to trust them, and they said every penny is going to go to the victims and their families. Well, if we look at the National Victim Support Network, which we will in a minute, you'll see that that's probably impossible.
Because there's counts missing for the last period. I think it ends 2013.
Yeah, they haven't filed for the last 2 years, and they have staff and overheads in a building in Washington, D.C. or something like this. So who knows? But many of these GoFundMe pages have popped up, Brian.
So we
Dozens.
this is a smaller one here. This is an individual who's saying, I'm here. My name's Ryan Mullinax, and I'm raising funds for those affected by the tragedy in Orlando. And they're seeking $100,000, and they've got 520 to date. But your point is that all of a sudden these pages are springing up everywhere.
They're mushrooming around this event. So we don't know. What I think people should take real caution and care and really think, pause before you jump in, maybe to give money in the aftermath of an event like this, because it has been proven in the past where people have hijacked.
So we got another one here. Let's talk about GoFundMe pages. And this was a website actually asking questions about the funding.
This is kind of a public advocacy website. So this tells people, gives them advice on what to look for when it comes to relief funds and charities and crowdfunding, especially GoFundMe. So GoFraudMe is the name of the website, but they pointed out that the surge in pages and funds within hours
was massive.
It was huge. So many people were involved. So these all could be legitimate. They all could be perfectly fine, but right. then again they might not be. So you do have to be discriminatory.
Okay, and we've got this one here, Angel Colon's Road to Recovery. So this is a man, I've listened to a little bit of this clip, and he says he's ex-American military, he's a combat veteran, and a friend of his was injured. He said he suffered gunshot wounds and broken bones. Well, of course, it's possible to have broken bones from gunshot wounds, but he was hoping his friend was going to recover, and he's making a very emotional, I am here, I am a patriot of the United States. I'm desperately concerned about my friend. I won't let anybody disturb the peace and tranquility of America. This is an emotional patriot birthday cake.
And we need to stand up for our country and so forth. And,
it's a bit over the top for me.
One of our readers tried to contact the hospital. So Angel Colon was on the news in the hospital when we tried to contact the hospital, and they wouldn't confirm that he was at the hospital, even though they'd seen him supposedly depicted at that hospital on the news. But total secrecy from the hospital, even though it was all over national news, apparently. So he just wanted to confirm, because he said, well, I might want to give money to this crowdfunding, so I want to see if he's actually at that hospital. And did he sustain those injuries? So that's just people wanting to check and find out, what's going on, basically.
And we've got another one here. Oh, this is This is the National Centre for Victims of Crime, and this is where you can see here that the last financial statements were for the year 2013. So this is the point you're making.
And what's interesting is this group boasts giving money to victims and families from mass shootings like Aurora, Colorado, and the Chattanooga shooting last summer. So again, why? I mean, these mass shootings don't constitute even a small percentage.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
They don't constitute even a small percentage of victims of any crimes in America. More people will die on the streets of Chicago this weekend than in months across the country and other places. So again, why the focus on the theatrical, media-driven mass shootings? Why is there such a focus on this? Why do people have to throw their money into this direction and not to much bigger problems and much worse suffering and more death?
Well, part of it is bringing the gay community together, isn't it? They've now become a victim community. But we're going to have to watch the time a little bit here. We got so much to discuss around this. We'll just move on through another subject, and then we're going to have a look at what's happening with the EU. So I gave a sneak preview of this, but I'm going to bring it in again. There was a GCHQ tweet that I picked up on today. It says, where our brightest people bring together intelligence and technology to keep Britain safe. So this was GCHQ advertising themselves, and I put it against that famous BBC video clip where the chief whip, the Conservative Party, 73, Tim Fortescue, openly admits to camera that politicians who were abusing boys were coming to him and his colleagues for help. They were covering it up, so the people would do as they were told. That's blackmail, covering up criminal offence. But GCHQ doesn't know anything about this. They've got a multi-billion pound operation. They don't know any of this is going on. And then I'll just bring you into this. This is The Guardian. Now, this is back in March, but it came to my attention. An article where, oh dear, what are we going to do with the paedophiles? They need medical treatment, they need psychiatry, and we're going to look at methods to give them drug treatment. This was part of the middle of the text. The actual extent of the problem's hard to pin down, but last year the National Crime Agency estimated that 1 in 35, or nearly 3% of men in Britain, was a potential paedophile. Information from 33 different police forces. Then in jumps the NSPCC saying that 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused. And it ends with a statement by Phil Gormley, the former, as we know now, Deputy Director of the National Crime Agency. He says we're all living not far away from a paedophile. So how could they possibly know all this unless they had some idea of the scale of the abuse? And then they're saying, well, we know the scale of abuse, but we don't actually know who carried the abuse out. This is, and we've got Jimmy Savile there mixing with politicians, mixing with the royal family. GCHQ says, well, we really didn't know anything about this. We were as surprised as anybody else. So I think there's probably some very good people working inside GCHQ. They get up in the morning, they leave their families, they go to do a good day's work defending their country. Somebody is making a mockery of them, because it's clear that people in the establishment security agencies do know this is going on.
I think it's also a case of compartmentalization. I think the nature of how that organization is probably set up and managed is heavily reliant on compartmentalization. So many things are on a need-to-know basis, and most people don't know.
Right. Well, we're not compartmentalized, so I think we're going to say, if you're an employee of GCHQ, perhaps you ought to be asking some pretty simple questions as to why your organisation doesn't know that there are paedophiles operating around senior British politicians and the royal family. Would that be a start?
Yeah, well, it's very valuable information when it is captured. That is gold in political terms. So it can be used to blackmail politicians.
As the man said.
It can be used to blackmail heads of state, as we've seen in the past. So it's very powerful material.
Okay, but this is the organisation that says, trust us because we're tracking all the Islamic radicals. I'm pretty cynical on this subject, and we're just going to bring this remarkable couple on screen. We're finishing off dispatches, so you're going to be able to hear these Brian and Janice Doherty talk about this horrific child case. They're offered money for their son. They, of course, tell the person to go away. They do all the right things. They go to the police. They go to the National Crime Agency, and they are turned away. And then what happens? Their children are taken from them by the British state. But as they moved and went on the run for safety, it's clear they're being tracked at a very high level. They're being tracked by their phones. They're being tracked by their internet connections. This is high-level surveillance. And I'm going to say GCHQ, somewhere in GCHQ, is a little cell helping the Scottish police break the law. We'll skip on through these. Let's come to this one, which Alex, you wanted to talk about, which was Fury as law firm boasts of a great win to do with child cases. This is particularly horrific stuff from a law firm.
It is, and I don't know whether Mike has been able to capture some of the tweets and put them on separate slides, but if not, I'll talk about it. The law firm in question is called Baker Small. And they're one of these law firms that is, for a large part of their business, by the look of it, the majority of their business, parasitically dependent on local government. So they're rent seekers from government in Austrian economic terms. They're not there earning their keep from the public, doing notarial work. All their work comes from clinging to the underbelly of expanding public services. Baker Small specialize in sending silks and briefs to savage parents who have the temerity to claim support for special educational needs, educational benefits for their children, particularly when they get to senior school and it gets more expensive. And if you look at the counties which people have been able to dig out that Baker Small work for and the unitary authorities, they're all posh middle-class areas of southern England. which tells me a thing or two. These authorities are aware that the parents there are going to do their research and find what they're entitled to, and Baker Small is employed there to squash the claims. And if you go to the Guardian piece, you will find links through to the blogger who has exposed this and who has captured the tweets, which have since been deleted, of, shall we say, a squiffy late-at-night lawyer from Baker Small saying, "Ha-ha, another fantastic win against those stupid parents." And at one point, the tweeter is even challenged from the Baker Small account and so, these are children's lives. What are you on about? And he replies saying, "These idiotic parents who think they've won when I demolished 9/10 of their case." And then he posts a picture of a laughing kitten to say, it's an equivalent of talk to the hand. I'm not at all bothered by your stupidity. So Baker Small has issued belatedly an apology, but it exposes that there are law firms which are just there largely to be paid taxpayers' money through the council taxes, of course, to assist local authorities to keep their budgets down and not to pay out the money that they're supposed to be paying out under the relevant acts. Well, so it stinks. And just one thing about that is that when David Scott and I visited you in Plymouth recently, we took a stroll around the council offices area of central Plymouth, and we were shocked to see how many law firms were there with their prominent offices right around between the Hoe and the city centre, touting for business for people coming in and out of the courts and council offices. It's a parasitic system.
You couldn't have summed it up better, Alex. It's parasitic, but we're now really starting to see how vicious and nasty some of these people are. We should also remember, of course, the public sector, because Staffordshire County Council that attempted to take UK Column to court for daring to report child abuse cases, said very calmly, their senior legal officer said very calmly that he meant their legal department, could do anything. He's on record as saying that in writing. So we've got people who are in a very, very dangerous mental position where they think they're above the law. Right has become wrong, or wrong has become right, more importantly for them, and they can abuse people. So dangerous stuff. Of course, in the city, we've got many of the people with the same attitude. So let's drift across on that particular line of thought to Boris Johnson, because this is some of the stuff appearing about Brexit. I had to pick this one up from the Belfast Telegraph. Well done to Mike Robinson and all of those in Northern Ireland, because this is the headline: EU referendum, Brexit will endanger wildlife, claims Boris's father. And apparently what he's worried about, what he says is, it took the European Union to clean up Britain's beaches, make them safe and clean. And if we leave the EU, then presumably we can't look after our beaches and the wildlife will suffer. We've got this one, which is the Express, where a young lady told David Cameron that he'd effed everything up. Well, nothing new there, but at least she had the temerity to say it in public. We've got this one. I think this is the Express again, which is telling us to pay attention to the stars because they really know what's happening in politics. And I couldn't help this one because it basically said that 430,000 people had applied for the European referendum vote during the extra 2 days to sign up. So presumably there was a bit of vote rigging going on there. But let's jump to the Sun. We urge our readers to believe in Britain and vote quit. Alex, I think you picked up the Sun. I'm surprised.
Yes. It's jaw-dropping, isn't it? I mean, I know that Rupert Murdoch has made no secret over the years of his disdain for the EU, but then suddenly for News Corp to tell the Sun readers at this crucial, well-calculated 8-day window to vote leave. This is a parallel of how Labour in 1992 thought they were going to romp home, and at the last minute the Sun published the headline, "If this man," that's Kinnock on the front page then in 1992, "if this man gets into number 10 Downing Street, will the last person to leave Britain please turn out the lights?" So very cleverly researched stuff. And what I've noticed, and people have been tweeting this out this morning and copying in you and me, Brian, and Mike too, is that Bilderberg has just finished its session in Dresden. And it's quite possible that Bilderberg gave the Sun, this might sound far-fetched, but I'm quite prepared to believe it, gave the Sun or Murdoch an imprimatur to say, okay, if the Brits are going to play that way, then it's going to be too difficult to yank them back in. It will look too obvious. So let them cut loose and think they've gained a victory.
Alex, I listen to the BBC regularly, and of course the BBC only pushes out truth and fact. And the BBC said that the Bilderberg meeting was just, well, it's just a few businessmen who meet and they don't really discuss anything of any importance. So I can't believe that they gave a newspaper magnate his marching orders. Well, I can. I absolutely can. And you've also got this one here, Der Spiegel, back on the subject of Boris.
Speaking of wildlife.
Speaking of wildlife.
Well, there's quite a lot of wildlife growing out the top of that bonce, isn't there? Anyway, Der Spiegel says, "Lasst uns nicht allein, don't leave us alone," with Boris doing a tug of war. And in fact, their front cover was a Union flag with, in English, the words, "Please don't go," or something like that. So Der Spiegel says, on behalf of the chattering classes or the liberal-minded in Germany, please stay, i.e. help us pay for the mess on the continent, right? And at the same time, now there's the front cover, by the way, "Bitte geht nicht, please don't go." And a lot of their articles, as you see on the left there, are actually in English for this episode to make us all feel loved and loved up. At the same time as Der Spiegel says, please stay, and I think this is on the next slide, we have here the Wirtschaftswoche, which is the hard-nosed weekly loudspeaker for German business up in Düsseldorf, well away from politics. The Wirtschaftswoche, Economy Weekly, is saying go. And the editrix here of Wirtschaftswoche wrote this last week as the leading article, saying that Britain and Europe need to go to relationship counselling. And she says they ought to go and hurry up about it, stand not upon the order of your going. So whom are we to believe? Well, obviously the German businessmen who've looked at the numbers and understand the society. So why is Der Spiegel urging us to stay against the wishes of German business? Well, for that you have to look at the origins of Der Spiegel. People don't necessarily believe this because it was a left-wing magazine, but Der Spiegel was founded by a club of Nazis and run for the first 40 years, up to the 1980s, by a bunch of Nazis. And if you look at the book And Into the Fire by Rodney Atkinson and other authors, you will find the names and details of those men who set up Der Spiegel as a Nazi continuation project. So of course they want us to stay and fund the Greater German project, but German business itself does not want that. They're a bit too realistic for that.
Okay, and you've got Deutsche Bank here saying that Brexit might not be terrible news. Nice demeaning picture there. It's shown as humour, but actually I pick up something demeaning about that little photo.
Absolutely, and particularly it's UK Business Insider that's covering the news, so they're choosing the demeaning photo, which is quite telling. But just yesterday morning, Deutsche Bank, which of course is Common Purpose's favourite banker and the most overexposed of all banks, so they're the broke bank of a broke ideology. But Deutsche Bank is now releasing a piece, or has given a junior analyst an imprimatur to release something that was maybe cooked up a while ago, saying, well, if the UK leaves, then their bonds will outperform everyone else because the currency will devalue back to its competitive value. Which is interesting. You might think that for a moment Deutsche Bank, with all its British staff working for them, had a moment of patriotism. But no, if you look at there's the slide coming on screen now. In case of a Leave result, we think that European equities could fall by 10% and UK equities could outperform due to the weaker pound. But no, the real reason for this, of course, is that Deutsche Bank is a bit scuppered with its cash. Like Zurich Insurance, they like to do a lot of, and like Mercedes, they like to do a lot of their business in Britain, even though they get rich on the continent from it. And they're a wee bit worried now that the coffers are bare. And if the pound devalues and they can sell more worthless British bonds, then that will slightly, put a thimble of water back in the leaking pond.
Okay. We did have a little bit to bring in on NATO and the EU. I think we're clock watching a little bit, so
cover it quick.
Just very quick on this. We've mentioned the Nazi origins of the EU. Of course, American money was coming in through the CIA as well. So here we've got the US and NATO. Quick comment from you, Pat.
The point being here is, in 8 days away from Brexit, it's also important for people to understand that the EU essentially has no foreign policy, Brian. Foreign policy, the EU, as we show from this and from NATO's website after this, is really the foreign policy of NATO. And who runs NATO? Well, this article in Sputnik illustrates it clearly. It's run by Washington. So they pick up the majority of the tab, therefore they dictate the agenda. So the EU's foreign policy is NATO's foreign policy, which is Washington, D.C.'s foreign policy. So the EU's foreign policy is Washington's foreign policy.
Right.
So, and this is from the NATO website here, and it outlines that they are in their relations with the EU, and it's stated here on their website that they're working together hand in hand with the EU. So this is the dominant military directive for the European Union. But David Shaler, this is a great tweet. Speaking of Nazis.
Well, we're going to say credit where it's due, because this is spot on.
So you want to read this one, Brian?
Yeah, have all those lefties who support Remain forgotten that the EU supported a manufactured Nazi uprising in Ukraine against the lawful government? Spot on.
I can't find any fault in that statement.
Okay, well, we'll jump and to end on your book slot, Alex, and here's And Into the Fire. What would you like to say on that one?
Well, Mike featured it last year and put me onto it, and credit to Mike for spotting it. And it's a really good read for the final week of the referendum. If you need any further persuasion of what the EU is, then read it, because obviously we're going to be called a bunch of conspiracy theorists for showing a Hakenkreuz and a European star on the front page. But Mr. Atkinson has page after page after page of names and dates and quotations showing that when the Nazis realized they were going to lose the war, they decided to go to Plan B, which was uniting the continent economically and putting Nazi placemen in the EU to run it.
And that is a very big story, which, of course, we need to start bringing into the public domain. Certainly when the result of the referendum's in on the 24th, whichever way it is, the public really needs to know what the EU beast is and where it came from. Alex, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's been a pretty powerful UK column news. Patrick, thank you as well for coming in. And I'll say once again, if you're a supporter of UK column, particularly if you've been with us for a while and you're not subscribing, we really would like to ask you to subscribe because we would like to continue to improve the UK column and continue to broaden the base of news that we can report. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.